So welcome. This program is called the Contemplative Study of Mystical Writings. It is a new initiative that I am launching tonight. So I'm thankful that you all could join me. This is very exciting. My name is Carl McColeman, if you don't already know me. And this is actually something that I have been praying about and thinking about since before the pandemic. So this has been a while in coming, but tonight we actually are going to launch it, and I want to share with you about it and about the vision that I have for a program that will begin in just a few weeks in February of 2022. So I'll share just a little bit about me to kind of get us oriented. And then we're going to spend some time. I just want to share with you some information about a classic mystical book with a surprising title. Many of you already know the book that I'm going to be discussing. And if you don't, you're going to find out in just a few minutes. And that will be a lead-in then to talking more about this initiative, this Contemplative Study of Mystical Writings program, giving you an overview of my vision for this program. And then obviously we'll end with an invitation for participation. So I'm hoping that even if you decide you don't want to participate in a longer program, that the material that I share with you tonight will be of interest. Hopefully it will be a blessing for you. And of course, I hope that if you feel called to take a deeper dive with me and with some other folks, that you'll consider doing that. So again, my name is Carl McColeman. That is not the best picture ever taken of me, but I realized I don't have a new headshot. These glasses are brand new. I just got them about 2 weeks ago. So on my to-do list is to get a new headshot, but there you go. So many of you may know me from the podcast that I co-host, Encountering Silence, with my dear friends, Kevin Johnson and Cassidy Hall. We've been doing that podcast now for over 3 years and have had just some amazing conversations with a number of wonderful people. So it's also been a wonderful way for me to connect with people. You may also know me, even longer, even before the podcast, I have been a blogger. My blog is www.anamkara.com. And I registered that domain name back in 1996, believe it or not, 25 years ago. It's hard to believe, but that's why I have such a cool domain name. And been blogging not quite that long, but almost that long. And but to begin to tell you just a little bit about myself, I want to share this picture. This coming May of 2022 will represent the 10th anniversary of me making my solemn profession as a lay Cistercian. So, okay, that's a mouthful of a word. A lay Cistercian is a lay person who is an associate of a Trappist monastery, Trappist or a Cistercian monastery. In my case, it's the Monastery of the Holy Spirit in Conyers, Georgia. Those of you who are familiar with the Atlanta area, you probably know the monastery. If you don't, I hope you will get to know it soon. It is a wonderful, wonderful place. And I just feel really honored that it has become a spiritual home for me. As a lay associate, I'm kind of part of the monks' extended family. I don't live at the monastery. I am married. I am a lay person, quote unquote, but I have this incredible bond with the monastery. And hopefully you'll see why I wanted to share that with you as we get into the material we're going to be talking about tonight. I thought it might be fun to, again, briefly share a little bit of my story through books. So I've got just a couple of book covers on this slide that will hopefully give you a sense of me. And so the story begins with Evelyn Underhill's book, Mysticism, right after my graduation from high school, back when God was a boy. I had a dream about the world coming to an end, and I shared that story with a friend of mine, a few years older than me, and he gives me a copy of this book, Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill. The book he gave me looks just like this cover. I think it is just the ugliest book cover ever. Do not judge a book by its cover. This is Exhibit A, because the book itself is luminous. It was written in 1911. It is a look at the mystical tradition, primarily of Christianity, although she does draw from other traditions as well. And so reading this book as a young person, it opened my eyes to the riches of the Western contemplative mystical tradition, the deep spiritual tradition of Christianity, and then of other faiths as well, but primarily Christianity. Then when I was in college, uh, a professor of mine recommended that I read a book called The Seven-Storey Mountain by Thomas Merton. I know many of you are familiar with this book as well. Merton, of course, a Trappist monk, the same kind of monk as the monastery that I'm affiliated with, and really one of the great lights of 20th century spirituality. So if Evelyn Underhill helped me to see that there was this tradition of deep spirituality, Merton helped me to see that it is a living tradition, that in the 20th century, there are still people, men, women, people who are embodiments of that amazing, amazing tradition. And then when I was in graduate school, it's like these different stages of my life, I began to take classes. I did my graduate work at George Mason University in Virginia. And I started to do some spiritual work with an organization called the Shalem Institute. And one of the leaders of the Shalem Institute at that time, he has since passed away, was Dr. Gerald May, who has written a number of books, but he's best known for Addiction and Grace. But this book, Will and Spirit, again, was one of those books that just opened up a whole new vista for me. Will and Spirit, the subtitle is A Contemplative Psychology. And so this was a book that really kind of, drilled down into how contemplative spirituality, mystical spirituality can be a healing presence in our lives, in our psyches, in our hearts. And so reading this book really, for me, not only represented an invitation into my own wellness, but also a real recognition of the ongoing vitality of this wonderful tradition. But I also want to mention that Evelyn Underhill really helped me to plug in to the mystics of old. And so the book I picked to represent that was Julian of Norwich. Julian of Norwich, who lived in the 1300s, probably of all the great Christian mystical writers, has long been my favorite. Amazing, optimistic woman who spoke of the love of God, of the motherhood of God, of God as not having any wrath whatsoever, but simply being this infinite, vast embodiment of love and grace, which was very, very important for me, having grown up with kind of a stern image of God. My image of God began to heal with reading Julian of Norwich. And finally, the last book that I want to share with you, I'm really honored and humbled to share with you a book that I myself have written. Just through grace, I have had the opportunity to become a writer and to be published. And so my book, The Big Book of Christian Mysticism, published in 2010, in many ways was my homage, my thank you letter to Evelyn Underhill and to these other people, that their writing, their wisdom had been such a gift to me that I wanted to say thank you. And what better way to do it than with my own feeble attempt to write a book about this spirituality that I love so much. So the reason why I wanted to share these books with you is because I love books. I'm a book nerd. I admit it, a bookworm. I skulk around in used bookstores like it's nobody's business. And it's just always been an important part of me, including an important part of my spiritual life. But I also want to acknowledge that many spiritual books are not easy to read. And so in this slide, I'm just going to share a few books. Some of you may be familiar with these, and you probably would agree with me that these are not easy books. They're not the kind of books you take to the beach. They represent usually rather deep philosophy, profound theology, often very psychologically nuanced, and just really do invite us deep into our interior lives, but do it in a way that is, again, is challenging. And I mean that in a good way. It's like going to the gym is challenging. Reading these books is like a spiritual workout. Now, the last book that I put on the slide, again, is the book that I want to spend a little bit of time with you tonight. And that is a book, it is anonymously published, although we have a pretty good idea who the author is, but I'll just refer to the person as the author tonight. A book that came out around 1980 called Meditations on the Tarot. Now, immediately you might say, I thought Carl's field was Christian mysticism and Christian contemplative spirituality. Why are we looking at a book on the Tarot? So let's explore that. Let's open that up a little. I was drawn to this book initially. I think I first encountered this book back in, I think in the 1990s. I was initially drawn to it because of the people who praised it and endorsed it. So I want to very briefly go through some of those right now with you. We'll begin with Bede Griffiths, famous Benedictine monk who spent much of his life, he's from England, knew C.S. Lewis, spent much of his life in India, working deeply in Hindu-Christian dialogue. He says of Meditations on the Tarot, there is hardly a line without some profound significance. To me, it is the last word in wisdom. That is high praise. A blurb like this means this author loved Meditations on the Tarot, but he wasn't the only one. Cynthia Bourgeault, who I know needs no introduction, says Meditations on the Tarot presents a brilliant synthesis of esoteric and mystical wisdom. Thomas Keating, the great centering prayer teacher, this book, in my view, is the greatest contribution to date toward the rediscovery and renewal of the Christian contemplative tradition. Again, look at that superlative quality of praise. Therese Schroeder-Shaker, the award-winning harpist, woman who has done incredible research on the role that music can play for people when they are in their dying process. Somebody who's actually been a guest on my podcast, really, really lovely and deeply spiritual person, says that Meditations of Tarot is a work of staggering insight, intelligence, imagination, and service. It metabolizes diverse cultural and spiritual terrains while participating in the mystical body of Christ. It is quite simply manna in the desert. And then finally, and there are more, I'm just picking a few here to share with you tonight. Basil Pennington, who, again, another Trappist monk, a colleague of Thomas Keating's, was actually the abbot of the monastery that I'm affiliated with, says it is without doubt the most extraordinary work I have ever read. Tremendous spiritual depth and insight. So friends, I hope that even if you wonder, why would I be interested in a book on the Tarot? I hope these endorsements will help you to see that this is something worth getting to know. This book has something to say to our generation. And so I want to explore that a little with you this evening. So that's the question. What gifts come from this book? Incidentally, these covers, these are the two editions that are currently available in North America. The one on the left is the paperback edition. The one on the right is a beautiful new hardcover edition. You can also get it for your Kindle. I think there are other ebook versions available as well. So it is a book that is easily accessible. So let's begin with a quote from Scripture. From the Acts of the Apostles, we have this. This is when Saint Stephen is speaking before he was martyred. And he talks about kind of the lineage that Jesus stands in, the lineage of great spiritual leaders and teachers. And when he comes to Moses, he says, Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, powerful in his words and deeds. And the point I want to make here, well, there's 2 points. And the first is that Stephen is acknowledging that great spiritual teachers sometimes are nurtured from without the immediate tradition. Here is Moses, a leader of the Hebrews, the people who become what we now call the Jews, the people of Israel, getting his training, his spiritual formation from the world of Egypt, the world in which he grew up in. And what is fascinating about this is there is a mythology about the Tarot. I don't know how much truth there may be. I'm going to just acknowledge that it's folklore, it's a myth, but a mythology that the Tarot itself conveys through its images wisdom that goes all the way back to Egypt. Is that the real deal? Is that just a charming folktale? You can be the judge of that. But whatever you may think of the Tarot cards, I just want you to begin to think about this idea that here is a book that explores this idea that Christianity can be in creative conversation with traditions outside of its boundaries. So the Meditations on the Tarot invites us into a spirituality of dialogue. The author draws from many sources, Christian, non-Christian, Eastern and Western, spiritual and secular, religious and esoteric. The index is just amazing to look at. I mean, saints like St. John of the Cross, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, St. Bonaventura, St. Francis of Assisi, but then also figures from other religious traditions like Swami Vivekananda or Sri Aurobindo. Again, figures from the esoteric or magical tradition that he draws from. Scientists, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who also was a Jesuit priest. So this breadth of knowledge that kind of gets poured into the soup of the wisdom that this book presents to us. Just to give you one example of how he makes connections that are insightful. He talks about the motto of Benedictine spirituality, ora et labora. Most of you may be familiar with this. It's Latin, it means prayer and work. And the idea is that a monk devotes himself or herself themselves to a life of both prayer and work. But the author of Meditations on the Tarot looks at how those words get used to describe places. And he says, compare the oratory and the laboratory or the laboratory. Oratory, obviously a place of prayer. Laboratory, a place of scientific research. So he reinterprets ora et labora to say, friends, I think that the Benedictines are inviting us into a spirituality of dialogue between religion and science. Wow, that was a major insight for me. And I hope that you can see just the promise and the possibility that way of looking at this simple motto, what it invites us into. And this book is filled with these kind of nuggets of invitation into the spirituality of dialogue. Now, the author is not afraid to express criticism of some of the material he draws from, but overall, his tone is incredibly generous, incredibly kind, and really affirming of wisdom and goodness and truth wherever he finds it, which I think is a deeply, deeply spiritual posture to take. Incidentally, I should also mention these slides. You'll notice I have images from the Tarot, and it's from a specific deck. It's called the Marseille deck. And that is the deck that the author himself uses, and that's why I picked those images for these slides. The author says that the function and mission of the Tarot is to elevate the soul. It is a system of spiritual exercises. And I should mention right here that he does not approach the Tarot in terms of divination or fortune telling or that kind of usage, that kind of popular usage of the cards. And and I mention that because I know that in the Christian tradition, there has been a tendency to see that kind of thing as off limits. And I'm also conscious that tonight on a large call like this, probably there are people who adhere to that kind of Christian thinking. There are probably other people who find the Tarot very helpful in their own spiritual life. So I want to be respectful of everybody's point of view, but I just want to acknowledge that this book is written out of the contemplative Christian tradition. So it doesn't approach the cards from the perspective of divination. It approaches the cards really from an archetypal perspective, that the images on these cards function as archetypes, almost as icons that we can use in our spiritual practice, our meditation, to go deeper in our own spiritual journey. And so that's really what he means when he talks about a system of spiritual exercises. And I underline that because we're going to come back to this concept. This book, what I would say, is a book about how to exercise the contemplative imagination. So if you want one phrase to describe it, that's what I would say. The book demonstrates this faculty of the contemplative imagination using a language that may be unfamiliar to many, especially many Christian readers, the language of ceremonial magic, of tarot cards, and of the Western esoteric or hermetic tradition. Some of you may say, I don't even know what the word esoteric or the word hermetic means. You read this book and you'll learn a lot about these traditions. But I just want to acknowledge that this is unfamiliar for many people who maybe are coming out of the Christian tradition. But that's part of, pardon the pun, the book's magic, is by taking two traditions that don't often talk to each other and connecting the dots the author draws profound spiritual insight. The book applies the language, this language that's unfamiliar to many Christians, to sacramental Christian spirituality in a surprisingly lucid and insightful way. And the book offers us new ways to think about familiar concepts and is fascinating and at times even breathtaking in its implications. I should mention right now, this is not just mere theory, that this book takes us beyond just ideas to think about. The author writes this, it's a series of letters, 22 letters, and he describes them as letters to an unknown friend. And so I think he's standing in the tradition of other kind of mystical masterpieces in the Western tradition, like The Cloud of Unknowing from England in the 1300s, or The Interior Castle from Spain in the 1500s from Saint Teresa of Avila. These books and many other books in our tradition were written in this kind of mentoring way. The writer was speaking sometimes to even just one person, or maybe to a community of nuns, or to a church, or to a community of faith. This author is writing in that same spirit. There's a friendly tone to this book, a tone of, I want to share with you my lifetime of wisdom, and in the hopes that it will be a blessing for you too. So the author sees these images of the Tarot. There are 22 images called the major arcana, the major secrets. He sees these images as each one inviting us into a particular kind of spiritual exercise. For example, you notice this is card number 1. In English, this card is called the Magician. It's also sometimes called the Juggler. The author suggests, and in the very first letter, he suggests that this invites us into a spiritual exercise of relaxed concentration as a prelude to all the other exercises. And what immediately struck me when I read this is that it reminds me of centering prayer. It reminds me of so many of the contemplative practices that are part of the Christian tradition that have that same kind of aim of bringing us into concentration, into awareness, but in a relaxed and kind of open-hearted way, again, as a prelude to going deeper in our spiritual life. Now, the thing to keep in mind, he writes this book in the 1960s. The contemporary centering prayer movement emerges in the 1970s. So he wouldn't have been familiar with that specific movement, but he's certainly familiar with the concepts coming out of our tradition, the same kind of concepts that then informed the centering prayer movement. I'm going to just throw a few quotes out at you, and I am going to read these quotes because I know we have some people on the call who don't have video access. The major arcana of the Tarot, are they not a call to the winged imagination within a framework and a direction proper to each of them? They are symbols, like I mentioned earlier, they're like archetypes. But what does one do with symbols if not apply the inspired imagination to them? So he's inviting us to engage with these symbols, to use our imagination. Really, the closest thing I can think of to compare it to is like praying with an icon. He is suggesting that these 22 symbols have an iconic function for those of us who wish to go deeper in our spiritual lives today. An arcanum, something which one has to take hold of and apprehend beyond the usual plane of experience and thought. This invites us to profound meditation, to a spiritual exercise. Let us follow this invitation. So once again, he's emphasizing this isn't just a book of theory. This is an invitation into spiritual practice, into the practice of meditation, of contemplation, of exercises that are designed to help us grow deeper in our prayer life. Here's an example of a connection that he draws that I just thought was lovely, and so I created this slide just to help to show how he connects the dots. Here is card number 16 of the major arcana. In English, it's called the Tower. In French, the House of God, La Maison Dieu. And he pairs it with the Magnificat, with Mary's song from the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke. And you can see this quote here, that God has scattered those who have proud thoughts in their hearts and has put down the mighty from their thrones. So the author is inviting us to look at this image. The Tarot started as a secular card game. So these secular images, and to see the resonance with the spiritual imagery from our contemplative tradition, in this case, from the Song of Mary, that this idea, you can see the people falling off of the lightning struck tower, cast down the mighty from their thrones. Just moving along, again, trying to be quick because I have a lot of ground to cover here. For each arcanum, insofar as it is an arcanum, is not a doctrine, but rather an event of opening the eyes, opening up of an inner sense, which permits things to be seen in a new way. So the purpose behind these exercises is to learn to see the spiritual life in a new way. Intuition is the cooperation of human intelligence with superhuman wisdom. Let's just linger on that and savor that for a second. Intuition is the cooperation of human intelligence with superhuman wisdom. So when we are accessing our intuition, he's inviting us to consider that we are actually, our ordinary consciousness, including our subconscious, is dancing with the divine presence in our hearts. For those of you who are Christians, Romans 5:5, the idea that the Holy Spirit is in our hearts. I think that's true for all people, not just for people who've been baptized or people who go to church on Sundays, but for all of us, the divine Spirit has been poured into our hearts. And the author here invites us to consider that that's the gateway to intuition. So the author invites us to revision spirituality. Part of the wonder of this book is how it revisions traditional concepts from Christian history, from contemplative history. To give an example, he takes the three what are known as the evangelical vows, or the religious vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and he offers a really fascinating new way to think of them. Poverty is the cultivation of inner emptiness. Chastity, the orientation of life toward love rather than toward consumption or addiction. Obedience, a commitment to freedom that runs deeper than the ever-changing whims of personal desire. So here are words, words like chastity and obedience. Sometimes, it's easy to kind of push back against those words because of the connotations that they have carried over the centuries. But the author here, using his contemplative imagination, invites us to fascinating new ways to take these ancient concepts, these ancient elements of spirituality, and to rethink them in ways that are relevant to our day, that I think is also faithful to the spirit of the tradition. And again, that's what I think is just so brilliant about this book. In meditation, and these letters are only meditations, it is a matter above all of the question posed in all honesty to our own conscience, answered in all honesty by our own conscience. What do I myself know? And not the question, what is generally known? What is he saying here? That there's more to spirituality than just learning lots of facts. There's more to spirituality than just getting well read in all the great mystics, the great saints, the theologians, the philosophers, biblical scholars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not to say that there's anything wrong with any of the above, but he's saying all of that ultimately has to be filtered through the reality of our own experience, through the fact that prayer, meditation, contemplation ultimately doesn't come out of a book. It's ultimately our heart in relationship with the divine heart. Once again, taking the three, what are known as the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, and just offering a beautiful new way to consider them. Faith is divine breath in the soul. Hope is divine light in the soul. Love is divine fire in the soul. So when we pray to open our hearts to ever increasing amounts of faith and hope and love, this is what we're praying for. This is what we're being offered. And I just had to throw in, just as a final note, his beautifully succinct definition of mysticism. Mysticism is a major theme of this book, of course, but he offers this wonderfully pithy definition. Mysticism is the awakening of the soul to the reality of the presence of God. Just reflect on that with me. The awakening of the soul to the reality of the presence of God. And that's what this book invites us into. Now, with all this praise, I also want to be balanced here, and I want to acknowledge the challenges of this book. So just very briefly, we're going to look at this. It is written in the 1960s, and it shows its age. It does have problems. The language and the worldview are rigidly gendered. There will be elements in the book that could strike you as frankly, as sexist, or as, very chauvinistic from a masculine perspective. And, my hope and my prayer is that if the author were writing today, he would temper some of that language. But I just have to acknowledge a book written in the 1960s, it still has that limitation to it. The author, it does have a generous heart and a generous soul, but he is a Catholic Christian, and at times he does come across as rather chauvinistic in his focus on Catholic spirituality. So, some readers may just let that roll off. Others may find it makes them twitch. So I just want to acknowledge that reality. The book is densely philosophical and luminous. There's brilliant wisdom in this book. But at times, the author does seem to get lost in the weeds. At times, he can be frustrating in how abstract and how overly symbolic his language can become. I mention this to you because, of course, I hope you will read this book, even if you don't participate in my contemplative study program. I hope that you will read this book, and you'll bump into these things. And my invitation is that you persevere when you do, because 2 or 3 pages later, suddenly the wisdom will be flowing again, and you'll be highlighting and marking in your book or making notes like I do. I keep notes on my Kindle. I've been reading it over the last 2 months using the Kindle, and I think I'm up to 260 or 270 notes, not to mention all the highlights. That's just how much I'm drawn into being in conversation with this book. So why should we read this book? And so let me throw a quote to you from Thomas Merton. This comes from a book that was published after his death, An Introduction to Christian Mysticism. Merton says, the separation of theology from spirituality is a disaster. And, I think the important thing here is that for much of our spiritual history, theology and spirituality were not seen as two separate things. It really has been a product of maybe the last few centuries. Theology has become more academic, more maybe abstract, more anchored in the university or in the seminary. Again, I don't want to criticize that. I think, I read academic theology. I'm not an academic theologian, but I love the wisdom that can be found there. But then what have we done? We've put spirituality off in the monasteries, in the retreat centers, and then increasingly just into people's private lives. And so Merton is saying prophetically, he's saying 60 years ago, this is a mistake to separate these two, that it leads to kind of a, almost a split personality in the community of faith. And so with that problem, I'd like to suggest that Meditations on the Tarot is a book that goes a long way towards reintegrating theology, the stories of our faith, the wisdom, the ideas, the principles, the knowledge base that has shaped our community of faith generation after generation and generation, to reunite that with the matters of the heart, with the disciplines of contemplation, of meditation, of prayer practices, of Lectio Divina, and so forth. This is a book that invites us to bring these two together, to undo the disaster that bothered Merton. How do we do this? How do we, as individuals, reintegrate theology and spirituality? The Pope's not going to do it for us. The bishops or the conference ministers, they're not going to do it for us. I think we as individuals, we have to reintegrate theology and spirituality in our own lives. And so what I think this book invites us to is a practice that combines prayer and meditation with the thoughtful engagement with the story of our faith and with the worldview of our faith. Reading a book like Meditations on the Torah can in itself be a spiritual practice. Here's another quote that I just think is really worth reflecting on. Andrew Luth, a British Orthodox theologian, he looks like he's Gandalf's younger brother. He writes, and he's an academic theologian, he writes, the purpose of theology is to safeguard against misunderstandings that frustrate the life of prayer. Why do we have theology? Why are there theology departments? Why are there seminaries? Why are there biblical scholars and theologians, generation after generation, reflecting on the wisdom of our faith to support all people that we can grow deeper in our prayer, to help us to pray more clearly, more heartfully, more freely. So again, I think reading Meditations on the Torah, obviously it's not the only book that can do this, but it is one book that can tickle our brains, can help us to grow in wisdom, even while it supports us in our life of prayer. But how to read it? And like many mystical classics, it's not a book to be read quickly or superficially. I have had several people ask me over the last few weeks when, it's gotten around online that I'm developing a course on this book. And it's like, is this going to be 4 weeks? Is this going to be 6 weeks? Is this going to be like a weekend? And my response would be, no, that would be just skimming the surface. It would not do this book justice. This book requires a deep dive. It requires lingering with the book. It requires not only study, but meditation. If you're familiar with Lectio Divina, the monastic practice of reading the Bible prayerfully, meditatively, contemplatively, I want you to think that's kind of the spirit to bring to this book, that it is a book that rewards being savored, being read slowly. We're going to come back to that word savored in just a minute. And so I am proposing an in-depth journey, and my inspiration comes from another classic model of spiritual growth that many of you will be familiar with, and that is the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. The spiritual exercises, which I had the honor of doing the spiritual exercises several years ago, and this year actually for the first time, I'm actually accompanying another person as she's making her spiritual exercises. It's an amazing, amazing spiritual process. Ignatius designed it to be an in-depth 30-day retreat, but 30 days where you're doing nothing but these exercises, focusing on drawing closer to Christ and diving deeper into the mysteries of the spiritual tradition. But even Ignatius in the 16th century, he acknowledged that many people don't have the resources, the time or the financial resources to run off for 30 days to a retreat center and just do these exercises. So he encouraged people to do what he called a retreat in everyday life. And by this, what he means is take an hour or 90 minutes a day. Just take some time each day. Meet with your spiritual director maybe once a week or so, and take 9 months or longer even to walk through this journey of deepening your spiritual life and deepening your faith. And so, friends, I am proposing a walk with Meditations on the Torah that would follow this pattern. But since we're going to be starting in February, I'm going to suggest that we take the year, that we take 11 months. There are 22 letters in this book, 2 a month. That takes us 11 months. So it'll begin in February and it'll run us through the end of the year. Here's a quote from a critic who says that this book begs not only to be studied cover to cover, but also to be savored, meditated upon, and assimilated into one's life. This, I think, gives us a hint as to how to approach this book. So we study the book. Yes, read it with your mind, read it to learn. That certainly is an important part of the process. What story is this book telling us? But then savor the wisdom. What insights does this hold for me? What do I feel called to linger over? Meditate. How does God meet me in this wisdom? How does this call me deeper into prayer? And then finally, assimilate. How does this invite me to grow and to transform? So, study is a beautiful thing. Academic study, just the normal way that we try to learn. We read for information. We read to master a topic. It's like learning a foreign language, or learning algebra or something like that. You want to master the material. Perfectly valid, perfectly important. But contemplative study is a different perspective. It's not reading for information, it's reading for formation. It's like, how does this material change me? How does this invite me to grow? How does this invite me to go deeper in my prayer life? So heisukia, a Greek word that means silence, but it means contemplative silence. That silence, I think, is an important part of a contemplative approach to study. That we need silence when we read, but we also need silence when we enter into meditation. Lectio, I've already mentioned that, but this idea that as we read, we seek what arises from within. We seek how these words are calling our interior lives, our hearts, into deeper conversation with God. The concept of unknowing, which comes from the cloud of unknowing, which I mentioned earlier, this idea that inner growth is not just about mastering all the facts or knowing all the answers, that actually stepping into wondering, stepping into unknowing, stepping into openness can be an important part of the process. And then finally, another Greek word for you, agape. Our priority is to respond to divine love as it manifests in our lives. So I am proposing a program that I'm calling the Contemplative Study of Mystical Writings, but of course, specifically this particular book. And originally, I thought this would just be a series of Zoom meetings, but I'll tell you, 350 people registered for tonight's program. Not many of them are not here because they live all around the world. So I've had a number of requests for an asynchronous program, a program that is not time specific. So what I am proposing is that I will create a monthly video to explore a theme from this book, and then also PDF study guides correlated to each chapter. So a commentary outline, a guide to the chapter, a quotes that I will pull, that I will curate to help you in your own prayer, to kind of just for your own reflection, and then an exercise. Now, the author does not, it's not like many books that are written today where, at the end of the chapter, the author gives you a step-by-step exercise. Meditations on the Tarot is never that explicit. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of reading between the lines, but I will curate my understanding of what the spiritual exercise is for each one of these chapters, and then provide a PDF to you that you can use or not, according to your own spirituality, that can hopefully help you in your daily walk, in your daily prayer life. This program will include a community discussion board on my website on anamkara.com, where you can interact with me and with the other participants in the program, so that hopefully we can keep the conversation going. That I will give us prompts with each chapter, each letter of the book, and then we'll just share with one another the insights and the wisdom that we gain from this. But I still want to have monthly meetings. So once a month, we'll schedule a Zoom call. I know not everybody will be able to participate live, but we will record them for those who are not able, either because of schedule or time zone. But for those who do want to really kind of be in conversation, in kind of a contemplative dialogue in real time, we'll meet for 90 minutes. We will begin with centering prayer. So silence practice will be an important part of this process. We will pray together, and then out of that, we will basically do kind of group spiritual companionship. I will lead the conversation. I will come up with some material to kind of get the ball rolling, but it's not going to be so much me giving a lecture as all of us coming together and all of us listening for the guidance of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. So yeah, centering prayer, review of the material, and contemplative dialogue. So to summarize, What I'm talking about are 23 units, because the book does have an introduction and an afterword. I'll cover both of those in the first unit. And then the 22 letters running for 11 months, February through December, 12 videos. I will also strip the visual and make audio files if you're more of a podcast kind of a person. A total of 67 PDFs, 23 study guides, 23 quotation and prayer prompts, and then just 21 exercises. And you'll find out why there's only 21 as you get deeper into the book. The community discussion board, and then 11 monthly Zoom meetings, which will be recorded for those who cannot attend in person. So I know you're wondering, okay, what is this going to cost? And so, you know, I don't know, you know, this is the first time I've done something like this. So I've done a little bit of research and talked to some people who know a lot more about online learning than I do. And the numbers that people quoted me, frankly, kind of blew me away. People have suggested that programs like this typically will run anywhere from $400 to $3,000 or more. And I'm just like, whoa. And let me hesitate to say, I am not talking about, you know, we're going to go below that low end. Okay. I'm not talking about those numbers, but I'm just sharing with you that that's what people have suggested me programs like this can run. If you did the spiritual exercises, the Ignatian spiritual exercises, they could easily cost you $800, $900 or more. So obviously programs like this do tend to come with a commitment. But you notice I have a picture of Saint Benedict there. I follow the rule of Saint Benedict, not as a monk, but as a lay associate. And the rule of Saint Benedict has this little line in it. It says, avarice must have no part in establishing prices. So prices, when you know, talking to monks, but also to lay cistercians, your prices should always be a little lower than what people outside the monasteries are able to set. So friends, I have decided that the list price for this program will be $299. But I also have an option that will cut the cost even further. And this involves a program that I have been using for several years now to support my blog, and it's a program called Patreon. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it. Patreon is a membership site for people who want to support independent creative professionals, writers, musicians, podcasters, artists, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, Patreon is a wonderful service. And so as an independent writer, a freelance writer, Patreon has funded my blog now for over 4 years now. It's been a tremendous gift to me. And so I want to partner this program with Patreon. So anyone who either currently is or who becomes a member of my Patreon program at $20 a month or more will have access to this program. And you get a 15% discount if you pay for a year up front. So it's actually $204 a year. So it is a recurring fee. I want to be honest about that. But it's also, there's no contract. So you can cancel it at any time. If you decide this isn't for you, you do have that option. If you do go the Patreon route, though, there are other benefits that will be available to you. For example, I do a quarterly online retreat day for my patrons. Retreat days like that, I've seen it going for $60, $59, $60 a pop. So that right there has a value of over $200, but it's something that I like to do specifically for the people who are supporting my work. So also, here's the little, but wait, there's more. If you do sign up before the end of this month, I will send you an autographed copy of my book, Answering the Contemplative Call. So it's just a little benefit for those of you who want to sign up right away. So to register, here's the URL. I'll put it in the chat and I will email this out to you. anamkara.com/MOTT, Meditations on the Tarot. And you can choose either Patreon or the one-time payment option. Patreon, it'll send you to the Patreon page. I have different tiers for supporters. You choose the Visionaries tier. That's the $20 a month or $204 a year. Once again, recurring fee, but you can cancel it at any time. Or you can, if you don't want to fool with a recurring fee, you can do the one-time payment option of $299, which you can do on my website. So either of those options are available to you. And finally, I just have to say this because I believe it, that no one should be excluded because of money. So if you are in a situation, whether it be because of an employment issue, financial hardship, whatever, if there's a reason why you want to do this program, but the money is an obstacle, please email me. We will work something out. So I want to make that offer. I want to be clear that partial scholarships can be available. But hopefully for those of you who do feel like this would be a good value, I hope you'll consider those first two options. Okay, and finally, I just want to mention that this is what I hope is the first of many. That, remember that slide earlier where I showed you some other books that are wonderful mystical books, but that are not easy reads. I would like to do deep dives of some of these too. In fact, I can already tell you, if this course is a success, then in 2023, I want to do the Sermons of Meister Eckhart. And so if you are interested in having this kind of a contemplative program to support your ongoing prayer practice, then please, participate this year, and please, stick around, because I really do hope to do more. So yes, the book was originally written in French. It has been translated in German and then in English. A fun fact, there is a photograph, you can find it online, of Pope John Paul II with the German edition of this book on his desk. Now, I don't know if that means he read it or not, but we do know that Cardinal Hans Urs von Balthasar, he wrote the afterword to the book, and he and Pope John Paul were friends. So I think it is reasonable to speculate that even Pope John Paul II was a fan of this particular book. Let's see, so people had just posted some information about the Marseille Tarot. You can find the images online. I mean, all the images I used, I just grabbed them from the internet. The deck itself is in the public domain. There is a beautiful, you can buy the deck. So I would suggest either downloading the images from online or going ahead and buying the deck when you work with this book, because looking at the images in full color is definitely a help. I see we have at least one person from Germany here. Bless you for being here. I know it's the middle of the night for you, but thanks for joining. People said it's worth the journey. Amen. I am finishing my third read on the book, and of course I will read it again as we go through it for the rest of this year. So it'll be my fourth trip down the Yellow Brick Road. It's such an amazing book. I'm just excited to share this book with all of you. People put some quotes up about the spiritual exercises. Yes, if you haven't done the spiritual exercises, it's another amazing, really life-changing program that I would highly recommend. So let's see what else. Is this an intro level course, or should you have experience with other similar texts? Okay, wonderful question. I do not assume that anybody taking this will have any knowledge of the Tarot, or any knowledge of kind of Hermeticism or kind of the esoteric world. With Christian spirituality, I think you can be a beginner on that side as well. The Zoom meetings, we will do centering prayer. And so I will make a point that at least at the first meeting, maybe the first couple of meetings, I will give instructions for centering prayer. I am a commissioned centering prayer presenter, so I know the drill on how to teach people to do that. Centering prayer is a very simple, gentle way of praying, but it is challenging because it involves being attentive to silence in our hearts. And so, as most of us know who've tried this way of praying, it's not easy because we have noisy hearts and we have noisy minds. And so centering prayer is an invitation to kind of sink through the noise, the monkey mind, as the Buddhists call it, and to find that silence deep within us. So I would say, if you're a beginner, don't let that be a reason not to read this book or not to take the deep dive. But it is not just a beginner's book. It is a book that goes deep. And so I would say that, that wherever you are on your spiritual journey, I think you can count on being stretched by this book. Thomas Keating, Bede Griffiths, Basil Pennington, these people were masters. They were masters of contemplative spirituality, and they were blown away by this book. So expect yourself to be blown away by it as well, no matter what level you might be at. What would the weekly time commitment be? That's a great question. probably not as heavy as the spiritual exercises. The book itself is 650 to 700 pages, depending on which edition you use. So figure, divide that by 11. So that's what, 60 to 70 pages a month. So that's 2 pages a day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but remember, you'll be reading this slowly. So I would say allow 15, minutes, 15 or more minutes for the reading. And then the exercise, I think that's really going to be up to you. We will have the Zoom call, we'll have the video, I'll have PDFs. It'll really be up to you how deep you want to go with all of that. I would strongly encourage anybody who's doing this to have a commitment to daily prayer. It doesn't have to be centering prayer. I'm a centering prayer person, but there are many other ways to pray. It could be, it could be the daily office. It could be the Jesus prayer. It could be Ignatian types of prayer, which uses the imagination. But the important thing is that you are giving yourself the gift of time where you're devoting your heart to your spiritual growth and your spiritual sustenance. And again, I'm coming out of the Christian tradition, so I use Christian language. Prayer is about communication with God. I know for some people the word God can be a trigger word. If that's your case, please substitute with a word that for you captures the mystery of love. God is love with a capital L. And that's what we are putting ourselves in the presence of when we pray. So I would say, that you could do this just, with a minimal commitment, or you could go really deep, depending on your heart, and the thing I will also mention is that, I want to be generous with this program. If you sign up for this, whether you're paying monthly or you pay the full amount, I'm going to give you lifetime access to the course. You get in and you can use the course. So if you don't finish it in 11 months, you can still come in and access the PDFs and access the videos. I'll probably keep the course online even after, December, for people who come after the fact. They won't get the live Zoom meetings. That's only going to be for this year, but they can still access the material. So if you find, life happens, if there's, as a reason that you need to pull back, the material will be waiting for you at a later date. So yeah, the book is available on Kindle for $9.95. That I use the Kindle, but of course the both paperback and the hardback, all 3 editions are wonderful. The hardback is only $35, $40 for a hardback. That's really not a bad price, and it's beautiful. Show you the books. So here's the hardback. You can see they're definitely thick books, and then the paperback, it retails for $22.95. So obviously you can get these on Amazon, or support your independent bookstore, which I think is so important. But and then to be perfectly honest, you can find PDFs of the book online. So if you look around, you can even grab the PDF and read it that way. The paper quality with the hardback, I think, is quite lovely. It doesn't have a dust jacket, but it has just a really beautiful cover, and it's perfect bound. But it's really nice. It's not a hard type. Again, you can see just how dense the book is. A lot of material, but I don't have the best eyes, and it's not hard for me. So I think it's fairly easy to use. Of course, the Kindle. That's what's great about the Kindle. You can blow it up if you need to. What day of the week will we have the Zoom call? I'm assuming Thursday nights. I can't do Tuesdays and I can't do Wednesdays because I have standing commitments those evenings. So the first one will definitely be February 10th, but we can also, I can open up a poll. If people find that Thursday nights is just impossible, we could look at the weekends. We can even look during the day. I'll try to find the time that is the most accessible. We may even try different times, which means that different people will be able to do them, but hopefully over the long run, that might be the most helpful. So somebody says I'm generous. Thank you, because I think that's part of being a spiritual person. I think we're called to a spirit of generosity, but also, what's in it for me? Obviously, I'm hoping you'll support my ministry, just to be perfectly frank, but also I want to grow spiritually, so I'm coming into this not only to share with you some of my perspective, but also to learn from you as well. that I believe that all of us can bless one another, and we can all learn together to go deeper in our journey. So I'm really excited about that. So, okay, let's see. How are we doing on time? Oh, it's after 8. Okay, I wanna respect people's time, so we need to wrap this up. But just the author of the book is published anonymously. It is widely recognized that the author was a Russian person named Valentin Tomberg, and he actually lived in England. He was an immigrant to England. After World War II, he worked for the BBC as a translator. So he lives this very ordinary life, and yet he has this deep interior life. He had been involved again with kind of the esoteric world from his youth, and then in midlife, he embraces Catholic Christianity and goes really deep in the contemplative world as well. Writes this book towards the end of his life. He dies in 1973. In the book, he makes a couple of references to 1965, 1966. So we know the book was written in the mid 1960s. So, you know, towards the end of his life, and certainly just, you know, manifesting a breadth of knowledge, a lifetime worth of knowledge that he is distilling and sharing with us. So, so how long would the calls be? I'm assuming 90 minutes. Figure the first 30 minutes will be for centering prayer, you know, probably a brief introduction, maybe review of the guidelines of centering prayer, then 20 minutes of silence. Then we'll move into, I will prepare some material to kind of get the conversation going. You know, of course, we'll have the material, the PDFs that I will have been sharing as well, and then moving into dialogue, into more contemplative, more reflective dialogue with each other, but then trying to finish within 90 minutes. So. Yes, if you're already a patron, you can just bump your tier up. Somebody asked, you know, can I upgrade my membership level? Yes, there are 3 different tiers that I currently have available on my Patreon page. If you are already a Patreon supporter at $20 or more, then you have access to this course, okay? But if currently you're, you know, giving $3, $5, $10 or whatever, just upgrade to that $20 and then you get the access as well. Or if you're brand new, you know, again, go ahead and sign on for that $20 level. So, so I'm intimidated. Oh, don't be intimidated, my friend. Yes, it is difficult, but it's not impenetrable. There is much about this book that is lucid and luminous. And yes, that is what I see as my role in terms of the PDFs that I will be creating, is to really try to provide like a user's guide. So I can't explain everything about these books because there's a lot in here that I'm still learning as well. But hopefully I have enough of a sense of the lay of the land that I will be able to give you points of entry that will enrich your experience with the book. Thank you. That was a wonderful question. People are saying they have to leave, and I acknowledge that. Friends, please pray about this. Hopefully I'll see you in February. We'll be starting in early February. But again, if you sign up before the end of January on Patreon, I'll send you an autographed book. And with that, let me just offer a brief prayer and then we'll wrap up. And thank you so much for being here. It's exciting to me to see so many people who are interested in this kind of spiritual depth. So I'm going to close us with a prayer from Julian of Norwich. And I invite you to pray with me. O God of your goodness, give us yourself, for you are enough for us. We can ask for nothing less that is fully to your honor. And if we were to ask anything less, we would always be in want. It is only in you that we have all. Joyfully we pray in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, my friends. Good night.